After all the years of my story being in my thoughts and dreams, I felt I was closing in on the reality. I decided this time I wasn't going to listen to anybody who said, "It might be time to move on," or "It's just not possible to find your hometown in all of India like this." Lisa never said those things, and with her support, I became even more determined to succeed. I didn't tell many people what I was doing anyway, and I decided not to tell my parents. I was worried they might misunderstand my intentions. I didn't want them to think that the intensity of my search revealed an unhappiness with the life they'd given me or the way they'd raised me. I also didn't want them to think that I was wasting time. So even as it took up more and more of my life, I kept it mostly to myself. I finished work with Dad at 5 p.m., and by 5:30, I would be back at the laptop, slowly advancing along train tracks and studying the towns they led to. This went on for months. It had been over a year since I started, but I reasoned that even if it took years or decades, it was possible to eventually sift completely through a haystack. The needle would have to show up if I persisted. Slowly, over several more months, I eliminated whole areas of India. I traced all the connections within the northeastern states without finding anything familiar, and I was confident that I could rule out Orissa too. Determined to be thorough, no matter how long it took, I started following lines farther out than my original 1,000-kilometer zone. South beyond Orissa, I eliminated Andhra Pradesh, 500 kilometers farther down the east coast. Jharkhand and Bihar didn't offer up anything promising either. And as I wound up in Uttar Pradesh, I thought I'd keep going to cover most of the state. In fact, the states eventually replaced my zone boundary as a way of marking my progress. Ruling out areas state by state provided a series of goals that spurred me on. Unless I had something pressing to do for work or some other unbreakable commitment, I was on the laptop 7 nights a week. I went out with Lisa sometimes, of course, but the moment we got home, I was back on the computer. Sometimes I caught her looking at me strangely, as though she thought I might have gone a bit crazy. She'd say, "You're at it again?" But I would reply, "I have to. I'm really sorry." I think Lisa knew she simply had to let me exhaust myself of the interest. I became distant during that time, and although Lisa would have been within her rights to feel alone in this still new relationship, we worked through it. Perhaps to some extent sharing something so fundamental to me strengthened our connection. And that came through when we sometimes talked about what it all meant. It wasn't always easy for me to articulate, especially as I was trying to keep a lid on my expectations, trying to convince myself it was a fascinating exercise, not a deeply meaningful personal quest. Talking to Lisa sometimes revealed the underlying importance of the search to me, that I was looking for my home, to provide closure, and to understand my past, and perhaps myself, better as a result, in the hope that I might somehow reconnect with my Indian family so they would know what had happened to me. Lisa understood all this and didn't resent it, even if there were times when she wanted to ban me from staring at the screen for my own sake. Once in a while, she would simply come over and shut my laptop and place it on the floor because I was becoming so obsessive about my search. At times, Lisa admitted her own greatest fear, that I would find what I thought I was looking for, go back to India, and somehow be wrong or fail to find my family there. Would I return to Hobart and simply start again, obsessively searching online? I couldn't answer her questions any more than I could allay her fears. I couldn't allow myself to think about failure. If anything, I became more intense about my search as 2010 drew to a close, and the speed of our newly acquired broadband connection made it quicker to refresh the images and zoom in and out. But I still had to take it slowly. If I rushed, I'd leave myself open to wondering later if I'd missed anything, and then going back in an endless cycle. And I had to try not to bend my memories to fit what I was looking at. By early 2011, I was concentrating more on areas within India's center, in Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh. I spent months poring over them, relentlessly, methodically. Of course, there were times when I doubted the wisdom and even the sanity of what I was doing. Night after night, with the day's last reserves of energy and willpower, I sat staring at railway lines, searching for places my 5-year-old mind might recognize. It was a repetitive forensic exercise. and sometimes it started to feel claustrophobic, as if I were trapped and looking out at the world through a small window, unable to break free of my course in a mind-twisting echo of my childhood ordeal. And then one night in March, around 1 in the morning, in just such a mood, spent with frustration, I took a wild dive into the haystack, and it changed everything. As always, on March 31st, 2011, I had come home from work, grabbed my laptop, opened Google Earth, and settled in for a session on the sofa, stopping only briefly for dinner when Lisa got home. I was examining the Central West at this time, so I picked up there, traveling a train line near my former search zone boundary. Even with quicker broadband, it was still slow going. I continued for what seemed like ages, looking at a few stations, but as usual, when I zoomed out, I found I'd only covered a tiny area. I thought that the countryside looked a bit green for my dusty old town, but I knew by now that India's landscape changed appearance regularly as you moved across it. After a few hours, I had followed a line to a junction. I took a break, checking Facebook for a while before rubbing my eyes, stretching my back, and returning to my task. Before zooming in, I idly flicked the map along to get a quick picture of where the westerly line out of the junction headed, and watched hills, forests, and rivers sweep by, a seemingly endless terrain of reasonably similar features. I was distracted by a large river that fed into what looked like a massive, deep blue lake called Na Damanyani Sagar, which was surrounded by some lush country and had mountains to its north. For a while, I enjoyed this little exploration, indulgently unrelated to my search, like a recreational hike of grand proportions. It was getting late after all, and I'd turn in soon. There didn't seem to be any train lines in this part of the country, which might have been why it was relaxing to look at. But once I'd noticed that, I found myself almost subconsciously looking for one. There were villages and towns dotted around here and there, and I wondered how the people traveled without rail. Perhaps they didn't move around much. And farther west, still no tracks. Then as the countryside flattened out into farmland, I finally came across a little blue symbol denoting a train station. I was so attuned to looking for them, I was somehow relieved to find this one, and I checked out the tiny wayside station, just a few buildings to the side of a reasonably major train line with several tracks. Out of habit, I started tracing the route as it wound southwest. I quickly came across another station, a bit bigger, again with a platform on only one side of the tracks, but some areas of the township on either side. That explained the overpass. And was that a water tower just nearby? Holding my breath, I zoomed in for a closer look. Sure enough, it was a municipal water tank just across from the platform, and not far from a large pedestrian overpass spanning the railway line. I scrolled over to the town side and saw something incredible. A horseshoe-shaped road around a square, immediately outside the station. Could it be? Perhaps it was the ring road I used to be able to see from the platform? Was it possible? I closed my eyes and went back 24 years in time to when I would walk to the station's exit and see the ring road with an island in the middle. I thought to myself, this is unique. I haven't seen this before. I zoomed out, discovering that the train line skimmed the northwestern edge of a really large town. I clicked on the blue train station symbol to reveal its name. Burhanpur. My heart nearly stopped. Burhanpur. I didn't recognize the town itself, but then I'd never been in it. I never left the platform. I zoomed back in and re-examined the ring road, the water tower, the overpass, and they were all positioned where I remembered them. That meant that not far away, just up the line, I should find my hometown, Guinnessleigh. Almost afraid to do so, I dragged the cursor to pull the image north along the train line. When I saw that the track crossed a gorge just on the edge of the built-up area, I was flooded with adrenaline. I remembered in a flash that the train I took with my brothers traveled on a small bridge over a gorge like that before pulling into the station. I pushed on more urgently, east then northeast. In just moments, zooming over 70 kilometers of green farms, forested hills, and small rivers. Then I passed across some dry, flat land, broken up by a patchwork of irrigated farmland and the occasional small village, before I hit a bridge over a substantial river. Ahead, I was able to see the town's outskirts. The river's flow was significantly reduced below the bridge by dam walls on either side. If this was the right place, this was the river I used to play in. And there should be a bigger concrete dam wall to my right, a little farther from the bridge. There it was. I sat staring at the screen for what seemed like an eternity. What I was looking at matched the picture in my head exactly. I couldn't think straight. I was frozen with excitement, terrified to go on. Finally, after a couple of minutes, I forced myself to take the next step. Slowly, nervously. I tried to calm myself so I didn't jump to any rash conclusions. If I really was looking at Guinness-Lay for the first time in 24 years, then I should be able to follow the path I remembered from the river back to the train station, only a short way up ahead. I began to drag the cursor again, slowly rolling the map to trace the course of the path, which wound gently alongside a tributary stream, left and right, around a field, under a street overpass, and then the station. I clicked on the blue symbol, and the name came up on the screen. Khandwa Railway Station. The name meant nothing to me. My stomach nodded. How could this be? Things had looked so right all the way from Burhanpur, which had to be the B-town I had tried to remember. But if the bridge and the river were correct, where was Guinness-Lay? I tried not to despair. I had spent a lot of time in and around our local train station as a boy, so I checked off what I remembered. The 3 platforms, the covered pedestrian overpass that connected them, an underpass road beneath the tracks at the northern end. But it wasn't so much the existence of these reasonably common features, but their position in relation to each other that would identify the specific place that I was looking for. It all checked out. I also remembered a huge fountain in a park near the underpass, and I went looking. Sure enough, it was a little indistinct, but I thought I detected its familiar circular shape in a central clearing surrounded by trees. From here, I knew the route to where my home should be. This was why I'd gone over and over it in my head since I was a little boy, so that I would never forget it. Now, as a man, I followed the road up from the fountain and along the route of the underpass, and then the streets and alleys I had walked as a child. The way I used to imagine myself walking when I lay in bed at night, in the safe comfort of my house in Hobart, trying to project myself back to my village home to let my mother know I was okay. Before I realized I'd gone far enough, I was looking down at the neighborhood I knew as a boy. Still nothing like Guinness-Lay came up on the map. It was the strangest feeling, and one that I became familiar with over the next year or so. Part of me was certain, but still another part of me doubted. I was sure this was the right place, but for all this time I'd also been sure of the name Guinness-Lay. Khandwa rang no bells whatsoever. Maybe Guinness-Lay was part of Khandwa, a suburb. That seemed possible. I looked through the maze of alleys where my family lived, and although the image wasn't as clear as what I would get when I looked at where I lived in Hobart, I was sure I could see the little rectangular roof of my childhood home. Of course, I'd never seen the place from above, but the building was the right shape and in precisely the correct location. I hovered over the streets for a while, astonished, trying to take it all in. Finally, I couldn't contain my excitement any longer. I called out to Lisa, "I've found my hometown! You've got to come and see this!" It was only then that I realized the time. I'd been at the computer for over 7 hours nonstop, except for dinner. Lisa poked her head around the corner, yawning in her nightie. It took her a moment to wake up properly, but even half asleep she could see my excitement. "Are you sure?" she asked. "This is it. This is it," I replied. In that moment, I was convinced. This is my hometown. It had taken 8 months of intense searching, and it was nearly 5 years since I'd first downloaded Google Earth. Lisa grinned and hugged me tightly. "That's so great. You did it, Saru."